Truly, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here, especially at a very interesting time with my fellow panelists. Before I start, I think I'll do a quick round of introductions, although they don't need any introduction. I'm joined by Kate Hampton, the CEO of the SIF Foundation, which is wonderful to have you here, Kate. John Palfrey, the president of MacArthur Foundation. Olivia, my dear friend, leading Co-Impact. And Binaifer, president of OSF. Wonderful to have you all here. And we are here to talk about a topic that is philanthropy at a crossroads. Can we fund at the speed of innovation? So what is innovation in a time of crisis? We were just talking about that before we came on stage. And I think all of you who are here to listen, including my fellow panelists, I think you know better than anyone else how we can create new solutions in a time where systems are fractured, where every day we wake up to a new reality, and where we are looking to be the change, looking not just to drive the change, but to be the change. And we have an hour and a half to spend together, and I want to make sure that I leave enough time for you to ask questions from my fellow panelists. But because I am in this unique position of moderator, I'm going to ask the first 3 questions that I always wanted to know the answer to. But I encourage you to take this time to ask my fellow panelists things that are burning in your mind as well. So I'm going to start by asking our only man, good job, Skoll. We also very strategically placed him in the center.
I asked them not to. I said, please don't center me, but they did it anyway.
On the hot seat. John, you're used to it. So I think I want to say I'm a bit of a fangirl of John at the moment. I think if you haven't looked at his LinkedIn page, please do. If you're not following it, follow it now. I follow it. Every day, this man stands up and says something which I think makes a lot of sense. So get onto his LinkedIn if you haven't. But John,
Naina,
can you start by telling us why and how the foundation decided that they were going to double down on giving in this climate? Was it tough to convince your board that they should actually move from 5% to 6%?
Naina, thank you so much for letting me be here. I'm sorry you centered me, but thank you anyway for that. And no, I mean, to answer your question, it was by unanimous consent by email within a matter of a couple of hours of saying we should spend more. So I think it's blindingly obvious that every one of us, and I know every one of us on this panel, but every one of us in this room must do more in this moment. This is a moment of crisis in our field, and we'll unpack that. It's a moment of opportunity, of course, as well. And for any of us who have the ability to do more, we should. That just seems straightforward. You said that we've increased our rate of payout. We are doing that. We will do that. But 6% is a floor, not a ceiling. That, in fact, I fully expect we'll spend substantially more than that. But yes, it's true. It's true. And I just feel like no matter whether we're an individual, whether we're a family, whether we're a big foundation, there is more that we can do. And some people, I think, are going to make a big announcement about it. And I actually think it's important that some of us do that because it encourages others to come in. Others are going to just do it, and we're going to hear more about that, I know. So I think there are lots of things we can do if we all play our position. But the answer of doing what we did before is not a good answer. And the answer of doing just the same amount is not a good answer. Whatever it is, it needs to be able to do more, support more, put more into the field.
So when you talk about doing more, supporting more, is it changing what you fund and how you fund? And given the new realities of where we are, where funding is being cut to existing projects, do you step in to cover that? How do you make those decisions?
We're on a global stage here, and one of the great things, of course, is that people come from so many different backgrounds and that we can lean into our strengths. So I come from New England, part of the United States, and in my kind of culture and family, steely resolve is part of the deal. Like being stubborn is being a Yankee. So we are stubborn on some things and should be.
Yeah.
Right. We have been supporting diversity, equity, inclusion. I do not care that something's being told it's illegal. It's not illegal. We're doing it. I'm stubborn. so some things we should not obey in advance. We should not back off. Other things we have to do better. We have not included as many people as we would like in the story of a multiracial democracy in America, as an example. So we need to do some things differently so we get different results. So I think there are absolutely things we need to double down on, be clear on, and do until we can't. Yeah. And there are other things where we just have to lean into the brilliance of the Skoll World Forum attendees, right? Figure out what the better things are that we can do to get a different and better result. Learn from different countries and what we've learned in other places. So I think absolutely we have to lean into innovation. We're not that great at funding at the speed of innovation, so the panel title is a little challenging, I think, for all of us, admittedly. But we can learn.
No, absolutely. I think learning, moving forward, and really looking at how do we do things differently while not abandoning our present allies. I think that's the takeaway that I'm taking, and of course, steely resolve. Moving to you, Olivia. I think Co-Impact has done a phenomenal job of bringing together local change makers and global funders. I think you've worked hard to make health, education, and economic systems stronger and more inclusive in order to advance gender equality. I think that's the reason for your organization. Can you tell us, in the broader funding landscape today for this type of work, what are you seeing as a challenge, for Co-Impact? How is it that, is it business as usual? How are you working today?
Well, thanks, Naina, and it's great to be here with all of you and with this great panel. I was thinking, actually, John, as you were speaking as well, about this point of listening to the people in this room, the people outside this room as well. And actually, as I was getting ready for this panel, I went back to my notes from 2014 when I started actually talking to a lot of the people who were here then around what philanthropy looked like then and what philanthropy needed to look like. And I was struck as I looked at it at how true it actually is today. So I'll share what those things were then, which was first to fund with abundance. So fund at the scale of the problems that we're seeing and the need to do that. Second, be in community. Recognize who you need to partner with and actually for philanthropy to then fund that. So fund the coalitions, the unlikely partners and the likely partners, and do that in collaboration. And then third, that the how matters, to support local leaders who actually understand the context best and actually then can also navigate when things are hard because there's that trust and the understanding of the context. And then be alongside for that kind of ongoing support. So it's not just about the funding, but being there alongside when things are hard. So I was struck looking at those and thinking about, yes, we've made progress in philanthropy, and they're in this room as well who have actually been doing that, and yet it's not enough. It hasn't been the norm in philanthropy that we've listened to these messages. And so I think what I'm seeing today, and you talked about the just do it, that's what we were talking about earlier. I think one of the challenges is when the problems seem really, really significant, it can be easy to get stuck and to feel like any amount is actually not going to matter. And I would say it's actually the opposite. At this point, this is the time for philanthropy to double down, to say, let's just get on with it. Let's listen to those who actually are doing things that are working, that understand how to navigate complex and challenging moments, and to get behind those leaders and those organizations in a big way.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. And, Olivia, you're in an unusual situation on this panel. You are a grant maker, but you also go out and solicit funds for Co-Impact. In today's challenging context, I think a lot of people would like to hear and understand, being a gender funder, how difficult is it? Are funders turning away from you?
So actually, we brought together our funding community to talk about what are we seeing and what's needed. And I think, like you with your board, and as we've been doing this, I think people are saying, let's actually move more, let's do more. Now is the moment to do it if there's ever one. So that's been really encouraging. I think I'll go back to the point, though, that there are still a lot of people who aren't doing that. Right. And so this question of how can we come together to encourage people to find those examples of people who are actually really to get behind and to do so in a way that is over the long term. Because I think one of the other things is people are saying, okay, well, what do I need to do right now? Let me sit back and try to figure that out. And so what we need to do is stop trying to think for the partners, but actually let them do the work and then get on with it as funders behind it. So I think that's where I think there's a lot of possibility. And I'm seeing that with the funding community overall. But I think to the point of urgency, it needs to happen faster and in a more significant way than it ever has in the past. And so that's what I hope we will also continue to see.
Absolutely. And I really will take away, let the partners do the work, you know. I think that's really important. Binaifer, coming to you. I think OSF has always been known and recognized as an activist foundation and an activist funder. However, the times that we are living in currently are much more complex. How are you, as the leader of OSF, consolidating what you're doing? And what can you share with us about working in difficult circumstances? Something that I think the foundation has been very, very much familiar with.
So we build on a legacy that's a long legacy. In fact, this room is called the Nelson Mandela Room, and actually the first act that George Soros did was to fund scholarships for black students in apartheid South Africa at a time when apartheid didn't look like it was ending. And I think that it shows that the progress that we've made. So I think that even in situations of complexity, we need to actually keep perspective. So I think the first thing is that the world is shifting under us, and I think that as we do philanthropy, it's not just to do more, it's also to do different. And you know, we're no longer, the unipolar world is closed. We're no longer in a G7 world. BRICS countries, the cumulative GDP of BRICS countries is higher than that of the G7. And that's nearly half the world's population. And we're moving into a multipolar world with a global majority now where different alliances are coming up, different change makers, different ways. So do more, great, but we can't, the world that we had, it's not a matter of going back to it or trying to restore it. I actually think that we need to be thinking about how do we do differently in the common alliances that are upholding rights, equity, and justice and where we see them. So just to say, we've always, I think one of the key things, and I'm proud to work at Open Society for this, is really risk-taking and courage. And I think this is a moment for that, and that's something that's always been in our DNA. The second thing also that we've had, and again, this is George Soros, long before everybody else was regionalizing, et cetera, had a concept of what he called local knowledge, which is communities that are affected are best placed to make the decisions for themselves. And our support has always been to work in places with staff drawn from different places and communities who make the decisions around funding. And then the biggest issue now, I think, as things shift is where is the moral imagination? Where are the new ideas? Where is the space for inquiry? And it's not quite clear yet. It's not cut and dried. I actually think that philanthropies need to be a little humble at this moment about not prescribing answers because none of us have them yet. We actually have to take stock of where things are happening and look at where the new actors are emerging and think about how we take risks in terms of supporting things that are not things that we've done in the past, because those new voices and those new ways of organizing are actually going to take us into the future.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you said is what I think we would all like to believe that philanthropy is. It's risk-taking, it's having the courage, it's not being prescriptive. As you also said, Olivia, it's actually putting the community at the center and the heart of it, of what you do. So coming to you, Kate, you're the only non-American foundation on this panel right now. How are you seeing things that given globally, there's been a lot of cuts by governments, by different funders on topics that SIF funds, like climate, like gender. How are you meeting this challenge? And how are you seeing it from your perspective as a large international funding organization?
Thanks. I mean, sitting in the UK is a real privilege right now, and because I know, well, no, let's be clear. I mean, our US civil society and philanthropic colleagues are going to face a lot of administrative and other forms of harassment over the next few years. And this is something which organizations in many parts of the world have faced. And there's a lot of opportunity to learn from other countries. That's never been a British or American strong point, but I think it's definitely something that needs to be done. There's a lot of innovation in civil society around the world that shows that you can operate in very tough environments and make extraordinary change. And so humility, I would echo Binaifer, there's a lot of humility needed at this point in time so that you can actually hear the voices that haven't been elevated hitherto. In terms of I like to turn down the volume of anything coming out of the US and turn up the volume of things coming from other parts of the world, because there's a lot of chaos deliberately coming from the US at the moment. I mean, it's not to downplay how extreme or traumatic the aid cuts are or other things, but the greatest tragedy would be if we don't use this moment to innovate, to collaborate, and to improve regional collaboration and integration. I was in China just a couple of days ago, and really looking at how regional integration can accelerate the green transition in climate was a huge topic. South-South collaboration was a huge topic. And of course, different countries and different regions, there are geopolitical issues which are you can't downplay. But I think it's really important to recognize that there are billions of people and trillions of dollars sitting in other parts of the world. You know, the aid cuts, for me, the greatest tragedy is that the aid cuts are extreme and sudden, and they don't give time people to adjust. I think it's pretty clear that if you look at education funding versus, say, health funding hasn't increased at the same rate as education funding. That's probably because of aid dependence. And so we need to have a real rethink about how we approach all of these issues. And there is, of course, some incremental work that needs to be done to protect some of the life-saving work that's happening. But we really need to use this moment to completely rethink the concessional finance architecture. And we can go into that in more detail if it's of interest. But we also really need to think about how we have lost publics. 2/3 of publics in the OECD are now anti-ODA. And there's a reason for that, many reasons for that. Polarization, cost of living. But why are people turning inwards? It's an important question to ask. And I think civil society has a huge role to play in bridging different parts of the world. But I think if there's a positive that comes out of this crisis, it's going to be regional collaboration, regional institutions. And you know, we're spending a lot of time around the world looking for new ideas, new spaces, new sources of collaboration, and trying to find the opportunities in this crisis, because we do need reform. But at the moment, there's a lot of paralysis, and there's a lot of people who are afraid to step out because of the bullying political environment. But we need to find spaces for collaboration in order to create new ways of working.
No, absolutely. I think, you know, not any one of us, whether you're a large foundation, any organization, a development finance organization, even for that matter, can address this by ourselves. We need to do this together. We need to do this in collaboration, and I couldn't agree with you more. But let's talk about action. Let's talk about what can each one of you really be doing and are doing that actually can address the challenge that we're facing at this moment and at this minute. I mean, we've always talked about the fact that philanthropy is catalytic. Philanthropy has the biggest appetite for risk. So starting with you, actually, John, again, sorry. What is the MacArthur Foundation doing right now about, you know, funding speedily or changing how you're funding to meet the challenge today? If we were to talk about action, what is it that you're doing? If you can give us a couple of examples in terms of how have you changed your behavior?
Well, let me lean into Kate's point about collaboration, and I'll give two examples that I think are sensible. So to your point, no one of us is big enough to backfill for the cuts. No one of us is big enough to give anywhere near the capital needed in this room alone, much less all of Skoll World Forum, much less all of the amazing social entrepreneurs. So we absolutely have to link arms and do more together. But let me give a specific example about speaking with moral clarity and the importance of doing that together, and then a funding example.
Please.
So one of the things that I am focused on, at least in the US, but it would be true in Nigeria and India, the other two major democracies we have offices in, which is finding those bright lines that we need to defend and doing that together. So at the moment, the rule of law is being questioned and pressed in the United States of America, as in other places in the world, of course. And I think we need to draw bright lines together and claim that we can't cross those bright lines. So in very simple terms, if a federal court has a holding, that judgment must hold. It may be appealed to a certain point, but at the end of the day, no matter who must obey that. And saying you impeach the judges and move on is not an answer to that. That's not what the rule of law holds. This is not a controversial topic in historic terms or present-day terms, but if one person is saying that, it may not hold, right? However, if everybody links arms and says, this is what the system is in the United States or in India or Nigeria, wherever it might be, and I actually think one of the great advantages is of having all these other examples out there, it will hold. That's why it holds, because it's a social norm. So I think philanthropy has a role to play to speak with moral clarity on things together and needs to do that as a whole. And we will see if it holds, but I think that is super important. We know the playbook, right?
Yep.
Picking off one actor and then bring him down and then go after another. Like, it's classic bully behavior. We can do better, and we actually have the opportunity. And I feel like certain things, there's just clear ground on which to stand, and we should stand it. But I think from a funding perspective of putting money together, likewise, collaboration is necessary. And we have some, whether it's AVPN or Co-Impact or others, and I think we've co-funded with virtually everybody on the stage. I actually think that in order to solve the most complex problems, which is what the great Skoll tradition is, we have to do it together in various ways. So in terms of focusing, in one example in the US, where we realized that focusing on local news was very important. About a third of America is now a news desert, which is to say it doesn't have anybody covering the school boards or the local environments. We know that depresses the number of people coming out to vote. It increases the cost of borrowing. It has all sorts of terrible things. We decided that we as MacArthur, even with all the money we have, could not fund in 30,000 communities in the United States, much less India and Nigeria. So we had to do it together. There were a few of us at the beginning. Casey Adiara Joyce and others stood up with us. We now have 88 funders funding together. We've done grants in 50 states. We now have 37 different local chapters. And we're funding locally to get other people to give money. And I think this goes to Olivia's point, which is some of what we can do is to catalyze other people to give. So it's one thing for MacArthur to increase by 20% or 25%, which we are doing. But the other is like, come on, let's go and actually get more money off the sidelines. There's plenty of capital out there. It's just not being allocated or released in many cases. And we, I think about what we could do as MacArthur, which is in the hundreds of millions of dollars more, right? And we will and are for these next few years. But I think about the total, at least US, and I'm sorry to take, because I don't know the numbers well, but US organized philanthropies do about $100 billion a year.
Yep.
If we all just increase by 20%, that'd be 20 more billion this year, 20 more billion the next year. If we did that for 4 years, that'd be $80 billion. Now we're talking about real capital, right? And so when people criticize, it's not enough to go from 5 to 6%. Partly what I'm trying to say is, if you just went from 5 to 6%, it would be $80 billion over the next 4 years. Real money.
Absolutely.
So do more. Please do more. That's awesome. And some people are doing 15, 20% payouts. Some people are not announcing that. Why? Because you get a lot of inbound email when you say you're spending more money. That's the truth. I will show you my email if you would like to know what happens when you say you're going to spend more money. But we all have to do it.
No, and I couldn't agree with you more. It's a floor, not a ceiling. And, just everyone doing a little bit more, aggregating that amount just adds up. And you don't think about it, but when you actually start counting it, it is a whole lot. But I think there was another point that you actually brought up is that, how do you fund something differently? And local news is a great example. And I want to turn to you, Binaifer. OSF has had a long history of funding human rights. And human rights, not just in the United States, but now human rights globally. And, all of you, us included, work in countries and contexts where it's tough to say that you're going to be funding human rights. Why do you fund human rights?
So the whole concept of an open society is essentially one where there is a concept of universalism, that no matter who we are, where we are the same, and that we want a world where all can flourish. And it would be possible with the resources we have on this planet if it was properly allocated. So human rights is very core to an open society, as is the issue of equity, as is the ability to redress justice, to get justice. And so it's a core DNA for us. And I think the lesson of the United States is that it is not something with a finish line. It is not something where you achieve and stop. And I think even in established democracies, there's always the need for vigilance. And how quickly it can slip away, I think that is that for any of us. And countries that have even slid into conflict, you know how quickly it goes. It slips away. And so the mandate of open society is really, as much as possible, to push for rule of law, to push for respect for human rights, to push for accountability. And we have worked for many years in obviously very hostile places, which is where the concept of human rights is most needed. And there are, we found different ways of working. You can always find inspiring people in any place that you go. And it's those people that we stand with. And some of it is about shoring up democracy in spaces that are democratic. It is about resisting when democratic space is closing. It's about helping to defend democracy when it comes under attack. And even in places which are very closed, it's about standing with those few voices that have the courage to speak up at great risk to themselves and to let people know in those places that they have allies and that there is people standing with them in solidarity. The modalities of how we do it in different places is different, but in the midst of a changing world, philanthropy itself is facing its own issues. In a lot of places now, there's foreign funding restrictions. In a lot of places, there are attacks in terms of the ability to organize a non-governmental organization. So thinking through, but even ways of organizing are changing. And I think that also puts the onus on philanthropy to think about how do you support movements that are not registered as a non-profit? How do you support efforts that look different, sound different, that don't use the same languaging, but are actually have the same aspiration and wherever they pop up. So I just think that solutions are always floating around everywhere. You just have to find them. And for each place, the human rights work is very political work. To understand how you unlock it in a place, you have to understand the politics and dynamics, which is why having staff drawn from a place makes sense, because your impact is better, because people have a deeper understanding of where they're working. And so once you are able to figure out how to unlock it, our work looks different in different places depending on the environment, but ultimately the mandate remains the same.
I want to ask you a follow-up question. I mean, it's tough and we're at the Skoll.org forum where we have a lot of doers that are present and that are listening. And I know that if you're a doer working in the space of human rights or you're working in the space of local news, it's tough to raise money. But as a funder, how hard has it been to find other collaborators to come in with you, to support you on these projects? Because running a funders network, I also know that funders are scared. And they're scared to take a stand on topics like this, which are so important, and it's so, opposite to what we think philanthropy should be, risk-taking and catalytic. How hard has it been for OSF to find funders to walk with you on this journey? Okay,
so I'm not a Yankee, but I'm also from the school of being resolute and staying true. I actually think that in environments that are closing, fear is really a potent tool by governments that are seeking to close space, and they are counting on creating a chilling environment that silences people before they need to stop speaking or doing. And I think that is one of the real dangers. And so that is something where in terms of the spectrum of philanthropy, Open Society has really stood with those voices. And so it's part of our DNA, and it's not something we don't sidestep difficult issues. We've chosen, long before harm reduction was an issue for people using drugs, OSF was supporting that as an issue. We have taken controversial stands with regards to sex workers, with regards to taking a different position from a lot of the feminist movements. So in many ways, we've made moves that are where we've stood alone. But we also are happy wherever we can collaborate and augment impact. And also we're not always the ones with the knowledge, so that if there are other philanthropies or others who know better how to do something, we're happy to join. I think what I would say is that this is not a moment to back down. This is actually a moment to double down, as was said. And it is going to require being kind of shoring up for the attacks that are going to come on philanthropy. So, it's not just the people who are at the front lines who are doing, but also the donors also come under fire. So it's about making sure that we stay true to our mandate regardless of what is happening.
Absolutely. Kate, I'm going to ask you something that is shifting tack a little bit. Yes, both John and Binaifer have talked about funding difficult issues and, staying true to the path. This is also a time for innovation and looking at, how we fund and what are the different types of instruments that we can use. You talked a little bit earlier about, ODA shrinking across Europe and the US and, across the globe, actually. I think that makes us think about how we can fund and how we can actually creatively try to address some of those gaps. Yes, not one of us can do that. It's a large gap. But looking at innovative social finance, how can we do that? How can philanthropy play a role in concessional finance? What are you seeing?
So, several years ago, Prime Minister Motley convened the beginning of the Bridgetown Initiative.
Right.
I mean, it's not as if any of this that's happening is a big surprise. I think it's just the speed at which it's happened is possibly surprising. So, I think this work has been done by many of the countries and the NGOs who are at the brunt of the debt crisis in particular, which is much worse, in fact, than the aid cuts.
Yep.
In terms of the volumes of money that are leaving low and middle income countries, outflows into creditor countries. So I think you can start at the level of the international financial system, and I will get to social finance in a second. But I think it's really important to understand that it is only citizens of countries that will ever be able to fund and direct their own social development systems, whether it's child protection, whether it's health, whether it's education. And the issue really is that countries need to invest, and the current financial architecture actually prevents them from investing at the scale they need to in order to grow, in order to build their fiscal revenue, and in order to provide services. So you have a significant structural impediment that needs to be tackled, and Prime Minister Motley and various others have been very, very courageous in setting the agenda. And by the way, as the Prime Minister of a small island state, Prime Minister Motley was very intelligent in working with civil society and philanthropy to set the agenda. So you can come together, governments and civil society, to fundamentally shift the conversation. And that has unlocked hundreds of billions of extra financing, nowhere near enough, and still within the architecture as it is, but a significant shift from where we were several years ago. So at that level, significant change is needed. In order to solve the debt crisis, at the moment we have this incredibly binary sort of corporate bankruptcy approach to solvency at the country level. And actually looking to Asia, there are much better examples of dealing with these kinds of issues in terms of there needs to be an intermediate phase where countries can actually go to market and reprofile their debt and address liquidity issues, but the system currently doesn't allow that. So there's some really fundamental structural innovations that are required at this time, and we mustn't lose track of those. But in terms of your point about more localized solutions, it is true that there is extraordinary innovation happening around the world. We're finding that sort of Western-style grant-making philanthropy, if you just come and meet other donors with your own modality, it's very difficult to collaborate. And actually, we need to be much, much better at looking at blended finance solutions, outcome-based funding solutions, and other things, working with CSR resources and other things that may be more abundant in other parts of the world. And that requires an ability to flex and collaborate and co-create. Most of the grant money is coming from the United States, but that creates a huge vulnerability, actually, for civil society. So we need to take a different approach and look for new sources of finance. All sources of finance come with their own power dynamics, just as Western philanthropy has. So we can't be naive about those, but we must be better at partnering with local resources, national resources, regional resources, and that will mean philanthropy needs to work differently and engage with civil society to understand the ways that they have attracted capital and then help them scale that. So we're looking very much at establishing different kinds of spaces where innovation is happening in terms of financing social entrepreneurs, but also advocacy organizations, and really trying to work out how we bring more people into that space. And then and this is where the sort of the global picture and the local picture connect, making sure that the different kinds of capital are used in terms of their highest best use. So for example, if you're looking at climate mitigation, what you really need is something that brings down the cost of capital. So you need guarantee mechanisms. What you might need grant funding for might be, the kinds of work that can supplement very, very difficult to fund areas such as child protection, for example, where there isn't a revenue stream clearly, and you need grant resources and you need government fiscal resources. So really understanding how you can maximize the amount of resources available for social and environmental innovation, but being very careful how you work, who you work with, what are the kinds of structures that you need so that you can be as efficient as possible. And just on the funding issue, completely agree with John. I mean, we're already spending at over 10% of our endowment value, but that's also because we have a living donor who is very, very keen to lean in. And obviously, for the more established foundations, they may all have different rules. And again, it's about understanding who you're partnering with, what they can do, and really trying to find that complementarity.
Just one follow-up question, Kate. CIF has been very good about bringing groups of funders together, around climate, now hopefully around health and nutrition. How difficult has it been to kind of take this sort of spirit of innovation, the spirit of not coming and being prescriptive, but really sort of trying to get more local partners involved with the more established, richer funders that you bring around the table?
I mean, I think it's variable. I think high net worth individuals from the US operate in a very particular way, and there are fundraisers who are very good at tapping into that market and maximizing it, and we need those skills. But I think we also need much better collaborative skills. We've worked at the front end of trying to get funders to look at different spaces and different areas, and I think it's a question of patience and partnership. We've done some work with some quite surprising entities. And the narcissism of small differences often gets in the way of collaboration. I spent a long time trying to get the climate and development community to work better together and not see everything as a zero-sum game. That seems completely ridiculous now. Why weren't we talking to the security community? Why weren't we talking to the guns and walls people? Why weren't we talking to the corporates that had actually adopted DEI policies and climate policies? There's so much more that we can do, and sometimes we spend a lot of time talking to ourselves and fighting over things. And I think in this new era, we're going to need a lot of patience with each other and conflict resolution spaces and a lot of respect for each other's theories of change, because in a period of innovation, it would be crazy for everybody to be doing the same thing. And we need to respect that some people are going to have to work closely with governments where civic space is restricted, and others are going to have to take a different tack. And we have to be respectful that all of those different approaches are incredibly valuable. So my experience from trying to bring these collaboratives together is really being respectful of the constraints that everyone has, valuing that people start with a position of good intent and trying to find a way forward with them. And that's the only way we're going to get through what is a very turbulent environment where the resources are scarce. We have to create a sense of abundance through partnership.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Olivia, building on that, creating this sense of abundance through partnership, how have you seen effective partnerships in your journey and in Co-Impact? Tell us how, both challenges as well as hopefully inspirational stories.
So I love where this conversation is going around the importance of partnership and collaboration. And I also would say that we've known this all along, right? We've known that the problems that we are all working on are too big for us to address any one organization, any one person. And yet the reality is in philanthropy, we actually over time haven't been as good at collaboration, whether it's because of what did you call it? The small narcissism, I like that. But whatever it is that brings us to it, where we then stay very focused on our own approaches and strategies. And yet we actually know that it is possible, that if we come together, there's so much more that we can do. And we've been seeing this actually through our partners. I think often we talk with our program partners, because sometimes we talk a lot in philanthropy about the need for philanthropy to collaborate, and yet we actually don't do it. But maybe we can take a lesson from those that are actually driving change and do the same. We actually were, just yesterday, I had a conversation with some of our partners who were talking about what they're doing now, and it's actually what they've always been doing, which is saying, let's keep the end in mind. Let's keep where it is that we're trying to go, and then let's figure out all of the different allies that we need to have along the way, who, yes, they may not have the same approach that we do. They certainly are not doing the same things that we are, and we may have differences, but as long as we all agree on the end goal, if we come together, that's how we're going to get through the messy. And so I think in philanthropy, that is so important for us to do as well, because I think sometimes we do get quite theoretical in philanthropy, and we have big strategies and these things, and actually saying, let's figure out where we're trying to go, and then let's actually listen to those that are driving the change, and then figure out how we come together to do this, I think is so key. I'll share one more story maybe, which is, so we had our board and advisory board meeting in Indonesia, and we've been having conversations around the macro environment, things that were shifting, some of the things we've been talking about here. And then we went and spent time with one of the organizations that we've been supporting, which is a women's rights organization in Indonesia. And basically, what they kept saying, so it was a group of women that are in the community who were talking about the people that they've managed to work with to make things happen. And I think for us, it's so key to realize, sometimes we talk also in terms of sort of organizations and institutions, and we talk about government as a whole thing. And actually, as we think about finding those people, and they're people. These things, institutions and systems are made up of people. And so that's so key in collaboration, is figuring out who are those people who are trying to see the same end, and how do we figure out how we let go of some of our specific things, but keep the end in mind, keep listening, and get there that way.
Agreed. Keep listening, keep the end in mind, and get there that way. Before I open it up to the audience for questions, Binaifer, if there's one thing that you would like philanthropy to do that is innovative, that is risk-taking, that is really sort of stepping up when it's required, what would it be?
So what I would say is it's, obviously money is not unimportant, but to me it would be sort of freeing some of the bounds of the way in which philanthropy seeks to try and measure. There's a big push to talk about impact, right? And certainly you want to provide funds to partners who are going to be able to demonstrate impact. But I think that what we don't want is metrics of impact that make us unambitious, because this is not we're not working in a field of science. It's an art form. And what philanthropy is the ability to be a talent spotter for good ideas, to recognize potential when you see it, to understand it comes packaged in different ways. And I think that we need to ensure that even though there's a valid need to want to know what kind of impact we have, that the kinds of issues we are choosing to tackle, at least in my philanthropy, which works around issues of human rights, actually, some of these things will not happen in our lifetimes that we aspire to, and that we want to keep, and that it's never linear. It's not a linear field where you kind of progress up the sort of corporate ladder of human rights till you get to the top. It actually zigzags, it moves, it goes backwards, it ebbs and flows. And so understanding that a setback in a short period of time is not a failure. And you have to look at, like I said, we were funding scholarships for students under apartheid. That's not needed. No, the world has changed. There's a different challenge. But at the time those were funded, nobody knew where it would go. So I think that holding the faith and being and not allowing metrics to define the art form of the possible, and yeah.
Lots of quotable quotes, people. Kate,
Yeah.
if you were to pick up the one thing that you think people in this room, funders coming together, working across the globe, what could they do differently right now? What could they do that would be amazing?
Well, I mean, back to John's earlier point, there's an awful lot of money in the world sitting around doing nothing that could be deployed. So that would be number one, because I think, those that are really trying to maximize their resources, there's plenty of good ideas that we can't fund that we'd love to see more resources flow into. But at a more, I guess, political level, I think having a really strong understanding of different context and having humility about different contexts is crucial right now at every level of philanthropy. And I think there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of doing that. I mean, to the point on metrics, I think having the ability to maximize what can be done in any particular context is where philanthropy and civil society are very, very aligned. I mean, I use the example of, the climate movement in Mexico and Brazil. They had some very, very difficult years. And, we didn't pull out. We sat down with our grantees, and many funders did pull out, actually, during the Bolsonaro and AMLO years. But we sat down with our grantees and we said, what do you think is possible in this environment? What can you defend? Where are the opportunities? Where are the pivots? Is public interest litigation the right way? Is subnational work the right way? Is community engagement the right way? And I think that strategic patience is absolutely crucial, but it only works if you're in there for the long run and you're willing to understand the context and you're willing to be guided by those who know. So I think this deep appreciation of context is probably more fundamental than everything at this current time.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And the fact that it's a big world out there. So yes, it seems as if the United States is falling apart, but the rest of the world is still going strong. Olivia, to you. Sorry, just had to put that out there. If you had to wave a magic wand today, what is it that you would like to see differently with the perspective of the fact that, we are nowhere near gender equality? You have this amazing fund with, these high priorities. What is it that we can do differently?
First of all, I'd love to have a magic wand, so that would be great. So I think there's a few things. So first, I would say what everybody here has said, which is I just wish and hope that people will step up in this moment. I think, as everybody here has said, it's not the time to be stuck, it's the time to get going. And I'm sitting here with three very significant foundations that are doing amazing work. I also would say every amount matters. So whether it's a smaller funder, whether it's someone who's deciding to give any amount, all the way through to those that are the really significant institutional foundations, it all matters. And I think as we look, and as I've been having conversations with some of our partners who are saying, look, even X amount will make a huge difference, and actually just realizing that. And so I just wish that people would see that and get going. So I think that's the first thing. The second is I wish that we would get out of our heads and just listen and go with it. I mentioned this before, but I think just continue to listen. Kate, you talked about the context, actually listening to those who understand the context best, and now more than ever to do that. And I guess the third is more about hope. I think it's very easy to, and this is also, as in a lot of the conversations I've been having, to feel hopeless. And you talked about the big challenges we face, and yet we see things. I think any one of us, as we spend time talking to those that are doing the work and driving the change, we're left with hope. And so I hope that we can all hold on to that. We were talking about that earlier, about that's what this is all about, is actually getting behind those that are doing this work. And actually then I think that will make us all keep the hope, and we absolutely have to, now more than ever.
Absolutely. John, I'm going to let you have the last word before I open it up to questions. But yes, we all want to hold on to the hope, but you're also doing small things every day. Mm-hmm. What is it that you think every single one of us can actually do right now?
So Olivia's magic wand gave her 3 wishes. Do I get the same magic wand?
You do. You have 3 wishes.
I'm going to restate 2 that I already used, and I'll use 1 more.
Yeah.
So number 1 is, whatever it is, play your position, give more, do more. And
Yep.
I think we've all hit that. But I just think, really think about it. Like, really, as individuals, as families, whatever it is that you're able and in a position to do. And if you're a big philanthropy and give hundreds of millions, if you are really rich and you could have billions, this is the time to do it. Open your wallets, whatever it is. So I think that's number 1. We've addressed that. But we haven't done it, so let's go do it. Number 2, I do think, and we've said this in various ways, is use your voice. Use your voice to the extent you can. Speak up. And I say that particularly to my fellow funders because I believe that in many cases we have the ability to do it with more protection and more strength than we think. And yes, there are good reasons why people are fearful for themselves, for their families, for their organizations. We do operate in places where we have to be very thoughtful about how we do that. No one more so than OSF, which has made such an incredible history of doing this. We too in India, we too in now the United States and Nigeria. But we are more insulated than many other actors for a variety of reasons. We need to use that voice. If we do not use it, we will lose it. It's perfectly straightforward. So that is absolutely something that we as funders, and whatever role we have to play, is to be on things where there's moral clarity, speak with moral clarity. But the one that I haven't mentioned that I would make my last one, or my real one, in some ways, is I think as funders, to drop whatever restrictions we think we can drop. There are no reasons a lot of the time to have things, for instance, as contracts even. I think we should give gifts wherever we can. So I will take an example. Thank you. Yes, I think it's true. There are all sorts of reasons for it, some of which don't merit being recorded on a global stage. But the real reasons, I think, for doing it are, we've known this for a long time, that the best way to fund, yes, meet the moment, all that kind of stuff, but is for a long term, in trusting ways, with trusting relationships. So I see Jim here in the front row, MacArthur Fellow. When we give a MacArthur Fellowship to someone, they get $800,000 over 5 years, no strings attached. They don't apply. They don't have to report. That's gone just fine for 1,100 fellows over 40 years. Right, Jim? Yes? Yes? Like, I'm sure there are other MacArthur Fellows in the room. You haven't screwed it up. We've not pulled back one. No one's ever turned one down. it's actually turned out to be pretty good philanthropy. So we could do that more in lots of ways. And of course, crediting the Skoll Fellows and other approaches that do similar things, I just think we can give more gifts. We can do it over a longer period of time. We can be more generous. We can have fewer restrictions. We can trust more. Now, there is a downside to grant seekers, right? Which is it means saying no more often. If we give bigger checks to over longer periods of time and we renew them, which we do, that means I say no 99% of the time when people come to me. That's really hard and no fun. And grant makers love to give out small checks and then walk away, right? That's kind of fun when you get the small check, but then it's a bummer when it's not renewed. I actually think we should take this longer view. It means saying no to more things. It means being a little choosier on due diligence. If somebody at the end of it has not done a good thing, just don't renew. That's fine with a gift. But I think we can afford to do that and should afford to do that. And I think that would be really powerful.
Yeah. Give longer term, give more, do the due diligence, but give flexibly. On that very positive note, I am going to open it up to questions. The light is very bright, but I can see we have a couple of hands up here in front.
Bibi Bakari Yusuf from Nigeria and the UK Cassava Republic Press. And I have one question to all of you. It is, what role do you see philanthropy playing in shaping the ethical guidelines for emerging technologies, i.e. AI and co, and what that means for gender, equality, and people in the global majority? And how can funders ensure that innovation serves the common good rather than exacerbating the existing societal divide, especially around ethical guidelines, please? Thank you.
Who would like to take that?
As for John.
I'll take a first crack, but others will. Thank you for this great question. Our colleague from Nigeria, I think funding to ensure that artificial intelligence develops for good, and I'll cite to Jim again and others in the room who are working on just this, it's a crucial thing for us to do as philanthropists at this moment. I think of artificial intelligence as still wet clay. It's still being formed into something. We have not, with previous technologies, decentered ourselves as Americans enough. We have not decentered ourselves as well in various ways. And this is an opportunity for the global majority to have a much bigger voice in what happens. So I will take and cite to Bosun Tijani, your wonderful Minister of Communication, someone in Nigeria who's doing great work on this. For instance, language diversity is something that we can develop much further by virtue of using these new technologies. So it's a great moment for us to do that. We do need to do that at scale, as the AI Global Forums have held. We do need to do that in collaboration, but thank you for the encouragement.
Thank you. We have questions from all over. Can we get one from this side now? Please.
Thank you very much for that wonderful panel. I'm Sebastian. I'm from Colombia, social entrepreneur, pursuing my MBA thanks to the Skoll Foundation here at Said. My question is around unleashing collaboration. It seems like a common trend. If someone was to focus 100% on unleashing collaborations, could each one of you, including you, Naina, tell us a little bit, a word or two of which challenges or ideas should that person focus on to unleash collaboration, please?
I'm going to let one person answer each question because we can get more questions.
Maybe a word, like literally.
Kate, unleashing collaborations. What could you do?
I mean, everything at every level needs collaboration. But just now, for example, given the aid cuts, I think there's a lot of focus on institutional maintenance when we all know that actually the current architecture, UN architecture and development architecture can't survive in its current form. And so I think it's a really tricky problem. But again, it's about having the right stakeholders around the table and really thinking about what is needed at multilateral level, what are the core capabilities needed at regional, national, and local level, and having a rethink, because there is no form of creative destruction other than defunding in this kind of space. And actually, I think, our community needs to come up with proposals before the end of the 180-day review of international institutions that the Trump administration has currently undertaken.
Good point. Over there, yes. I love the power to say over there.
Can we have the power to get you to answer one of the questions? It's so amazing.
Very subversive,
Please,
John.
Yeah, hi. I'm Stephen Tabby. I run Open Source Climate, which is hosted by the Linux Foundation. And we're trying to build a public utility of interoperable climate data and analytics to empower NGOs, financial service, companies, civil society and governments, everybody, to align decisions with climate goals at scale and trust. The point being to provide shared digital infrastructure, shared being the point here, to the entire ecosystem. And given the scale and urgency of climate crisis, and I heard the shared a couple of times here, how can the philanthropic community better support shared open infrastructure that enables systemic collaboration, especially in areas like climate data and analytics that is so complex? And what role do you see for open source, community-led initiatives, community-led software, coding, in building the connective tissue across efforts we're all trying to scale?
Go for it.
So at two different levels, a couple of the things we funded. So we funded 2 satellites to basically measure methane emissions, which come out of oil and gas facilities in particular and other things. And methane is the gas. Like if we can take methane out of the atmosphere, it disappears very quickly, unlike CO2. And it's the best lever that we have to slow down the rate of warming. So funding satellites, and that information is now being used by NGOs to help work on regulation and identify non-compliance with regulation around the world. So that's a perfect example of open source data. Another one would be the amazing work of Tasso and his team that started in Brazil and is now operating around the world with Map Biomass, where basically they've used publicly available information, they've connected it with the work that NGOs do on the ground, and they map deforestation using a combination of geospatial technology and on-the-ground knowledge. And it's extraordinary. I mean, you can basically identify in any area of land in Brazil what is happening, what's driving deforestation. You can see it over time. And again, it's getting picked up by government, by compliance agencies. It's extraordinary. And they're now working in a number of other countries, but of course the context is different, so they have to work very, very closely with local civil society in order to identify the appropriate data sources. Some may be public, some may not be public, there may be different kinds of restrictions. So again, that understanding of local context and using data to support both the work of civil society and empower regulatory agencies is a perfect example of the kind of thing you're talking about. We just need more. And given that the US has just defunded global health data systems, this is a really good opportunity to reinvent global data.
And absolutely, I think
well.
philanthropy must fund open source data. Let me get a question from this side. The gentleman with the jacket, please, right here.
Well, thank you. And thank you for an amazing panel. Naina, you're doing a great moderation. I think you deserve an applause from this audience.
Thank you.
And I think John is right. You should answer some of those questions too. My name is Ricardo. I'm the CEO at Health AI, the global agency for responsible AI in health. We're a nonprofit helping governments build up their capabilities to accelerate and scale the use of AI in health systems. Going to the question that the panel has here, can we fund at the speed of innovation? I would potentially say no. But in this time of crisis, we can potentially fund the world to be able to drive innovation and to keep up to speed with innovation, which is a bit different. And what we are concerned about, based on our experience, we're talking about AI, but we can talk about other innovative fields, is that many funding organizations in a time of crisis are doubling down more on the vertical approach, on certain specific areas to kind of cover on the tracks that have been missed out due to the US exit. Shouldn't we, in this rethinking of the strategy of funding and the reform that is needed, think how can we fund foundational governance models that ensure that the world at the local level is better prepared to embrace those innovations and to translate them into better lives for the citizens in those regions and countries? Thank you.
I think I get your question. If there was a question. Binaifer, you want to answer that? Putting you on the spot there, but...
It was a compliment for you.
It was a compliment for me.
You mean,
but in terms of...
Governance mechanisms in terms of what state laws and ability to organize around AI, or what?
In our case, yes.
But I think he's talking more in terms of like foundational interventions that would support innovations across verticals. Is that basically what you were trying to say?
I mean, that I completely agree with. I actually think, and I actually see organizing now more on going across. So, you know, it used to be that you would have separate programs on whatever, education, health, etc. But what we're finding on the ground now is the way groups are organizing is actually they're crossing boundaries in terms of the issues. And so a climate group is also doing women's empowerment, or LGBT group is also engaged in budget accounting, and that actually, again, is part of the change that we're seeing in terms of you're finding people organizing across. And I actually think in some ways, the field or the fields are already doing it, and philanthropies are not at the speed of innovation. So we're catching up now on that. So I agree with you.
I couldn't agree with you. Yes, the lady with the striped shirt, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your very thoughtful comments. My name is Naina. I work for an organization called the Center for, the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. And we do exactly what Kate mentioned. We pull together business leaders, farmers, now, most recently, more philanthropy, local leaders, to advocate for U.S. funding of foreign assistance, which we've all talked about has made a huge impact with its absence. What I feel is often missing from this conversation, and Kate, I really appreciate you saying you want to be involved, is how is philanthropy going to start being involved with advocacy? Because I feel like it's been something that you've been a little shy to be a part of, and you fund a lot of our partners that receive the funding, but as far as being a part of the actual advocacy of what the future of aid is, will you step into that role, both with your thought leadership and your funding for the organizations that are working to shape and save this?
Okay.
So I'm an advocate. I've started.
She's chained herself to bulldozers, etc.
That's not helpful right now. I was just saying how the protest environment in the UK had changed from the 90s to now, where police are busting into friends' house and arresting people who are eating hummus, planning protests. In the 90s, it was a bit easier to protest, but in the UK. But anyway. On advocacy, I mean, I've been an advocate all my life, and SIF does fund a lot of advocacy. I think advocacy can take different forms. There is the kind of on-the-streets advocacy, and there is technical advocacy, which is sometimes the only kind of advocacy you can do in some contexts because of restrictions on foreign funding or civic space. And then there is, the kind of work around strategic communications as well that we're, very engaged in. So I think we don't shy away from advocacy at all. Advocacy is absolutely essential. And actually, UK funders are allowed to fund legislative lobbying. American funders are not, or it's more restricted. So again, understanding the complementarity of different sources of funding is important, reflecting context. But in terms of the future of the development architecture, I think the really important thing is that the voices of communities and countries who were the supposed recipients of this aid, and let's be clear, a lot of that aid stayed in the US or in Western countries. It didn't even make it to communities. That being said, a lot of that money was doing incredible work, and I think it's really important that instead of just the Western sort of aid community having that conversation, we need a much more global conversation, a conversation that is about shared institutions, global public goods, regional public goods, and local public goods, and making sure that the resources and the governance is appropriate to that. And there are lots of new sources of finance, as I said, which are making their way into the system. So I think yes, it's really important that philanthropy does fund advocacy in this space and convening in this space. But again, I think just focusing that advocacy funding just on Western development NGOs is not the way forward. They have a crucial role to play, but there are also lots of other voices that we need to elevate right now to have a real conversation about where international collaboration is essential in the current context.
So I think one of the other things that I think you were asking was that not just funding advocacy, but actually standing shoulder to shoulder with the advocacy organizations. John, Binaifer, is that something you see your organizations doing?
I think this is such an important question because I think the answer is yes, but it's a little complicated for a couple of reasons. So one is, I think, I will use an I statement. I think I have been asked by the grantee community, by the world, to step back a little bit the last few years. As a white man, various other things, as a funder. And I think there's a moment also where it's sensible for us, as funders, whatever it is, to step in and to be more of a voice and to be clearer. So it's a little complicated in that way. I think our strategy will continue to be, how do we raise up and point through democracy of voice, democratizing of voice, our grantees and those who have the best stories to tell because you're doing the real work. But I think part of it is saying on some of these issues, we need to be in there as a voice as well because we, in part, can take some of the heat, we can speak in a certain way. The other side of it is there will be complexities. We are under attack in various ways, so rightly, wrongly, that's happening in the US and elsewhere. And if we get stopped from doing what we're doing, that's going to not be great for our grantees as well. So we do have to be thoughtful about it. The way I think about it is be courageous, but not stupid. So if you'd like to know about my use of voice, it's be courageous, but not stupid.
Correct. Do you want anything to say?
Sure. I mean, when the USAID cuts came, we got prevailed on very heavily to fill the gap. And we made a decision, in part because we're not service providers, not to, but also because we could take our whole budget and reallocate it to the USAID cuts. And in a year, we would be back exactly in the same place. It's not transformative. It's been done very badly, in terms of not having a responsible exit. And so it's leaving a lot of people in the lurch. It's done in a very callous way. But at the same time, it also opens up a shifting moment to really ask questions about the model of aid dependence and Western aid, and whether it is time for host governments who are receiving this aid to think about their responsibilities and regions to organize themselves. And to me, that's actually a good conversation to be having. I don't think that aid is coming back. I think aid is moving to military assistance. You're seeing it more and more. And so I actually think that while we can lament the manner in which this has been done, and it's been done very badly, and this is the moment actually to look to the future and say, okay, if that aid is not ever coming back, what's the alternative? What is the business model that humanitarian organizations should be developing that would free them from dependence on that set of funds, and what would be the type of work? What is the responsibility of governments to provide healthcare and education? It is a complex issue. So there are a lot of governments. In fact, 3.3 billion people in this world live in countries where the debt payment outpaces their ability to pay for health or education services. Yeah. Even governments that would want to pay for education and health cannot, because the international economic architecture actually impoverishes countries. And African governments pay higher interest rates on those loans than, say, European governments. And so actually, there's larger issues around why countries have poverty that are not necessary. It's not some fluke of nature. There's active systemic impoverization of people in lots of parts of the world. And now is the moment to open that conversation. Now that aid, which had been sort of plugging that gap as a Band-Aid, is gone, what is the responsibilities now? And you're beginning to see organizing in very new and different places, again, talking about new alliances and architectures of governments in the global south beginning to speak out on the need for global economic architecture reform, tax justice to end the big growing inequality gap between rich and poor. These are the conversations that I think are sustainable conversations that will allow us to move beyond this moment of aid cutoff. But yeah, it's a welcome conversation.
Thanks. And for the lady with the blue, she's had her hand. I'll come to you. We have some time, so.
Hi, thank you. My name is Emel Karboul. I'm one of the founders and CEO of the Education Outcomes Fund. And my question is, most grant giving is still quite traditional in terms of funding activities and at times sadly intentions. and we all talk about effectiveness and achieving more results. So we work to basically fund the learning outcomes and employment outcomes for 10 million children and youth. So my question is, why is outcomes funding or outcomes-based funding still seen as innovative and not more of the norm? And what would it take for more philanthropic money to move into holding all ourselves accountable for the outcomes actually we want to achieve?
Olivia, I'll ask you next. Would you like to take that?
Sure. I think it's tricky because when we were talking earlier, you talked about metrics and talked about what does it actually take to to take an approach to measurement which is in line with what it is that we're trying to see. And what I would say is when we look at a lot of what has happened in philanthropy, it has tended to be about this kind of dichotomy between trust and metrics. And what our partners are teaching us and showing us is that we should actually not see those two things in contrast, but rather going together. And so I'll give a little bit more to explain that, which is ultimately those that are actually doing the work care more, usually at least, about the outcomes than the funders, at least as much, I would say. And so actually having those that are doing the work say, this is what we're trying to see. It's what we talked about earlier in terms of what the goal is, and then setting what those metrics are so that it's easier to tell, are you actually on track, right? So it's basically you've got your goal and you've got these things to see. And to do so in such a way that you can understand not just your own, right? So it's not just about what have you actually done yourself, but what are you seeing shifting in the overall system? What are others doing? What are some of the things to keep an eye on? And then actually so when the role of the funder is to stay true to the support that's needed through that kind of trust for the type of metrics that the partner is actually looking to define. And so I think what will help us to get there is if we stop always looking at things as dichotomies and stop looking at things as what we're naming them, but rather just saying, let's actually look at putting the foundation. The foundation of all of this is trust. It is about actually building relationships, understanding what's needed, and then measurement itself has to be part of that. And I do think I sit on so many panels and discussions and things where it's either or. And I think what will help us, especially in this moment, we just don't have time. We absolutely have to figure out how we get through these and just get on with the work.
No, agreed. But to your point, it's difficult finding outcomes funders. I've just been talking to lots of people, and I know that. So you want to add something?
Yeah, so I agree with what Olivia has said, but I think you're also speaking about the very specific modality of outcome-based mechanisms, and we've had really good experiences with those, but there are certain preconditions that need to be in place. So just to use an example, we developed with the Indian government skills agency a skills impact bond, working with other civil society organizations and funders, and we basically paid the way that the Indian government contracts skills organizations, training organization, was to pay per person trained. So what we did is we paid a bonus per woman who was still in a job 3 months later. So you shift the incentive to getting more women into jobs and them staying in jobs as opposed to just being trained. Because if the incentive is just training, they will go for the people who are easy to find, who are usually men, and then they have training and a job done. And whether the training's relevant and actually helps them get a job or not, it doesn't matter. So this is an example of a situation where we were willing to pay for the outcome to shift the system. The Indian government was actually the risk financier in this instance. They said, we can do this, will you give us a bonus for that so we can shift the whole system? And that complementarity worked very well. But that you need the right kind of scale, things which are clear to measure, complete alliance amongst the partners. The contracting of those things is quite complex. So it's really important to understand where those things are really valuable. I think they're going to be increasingly valuable in scaling up and cost optimizing government systems. So if you look at the whole range of instruments like KPI-linked bonds or debt swaps, They're all some outcome-based financing mechanism, and what we need to do is scale these up so that those that are willing to pay for social and environmental outcomes can actually bring a lot of more traditional capital with them. But I don't think it works in the context of, for example, where you're trying to build up civil society organizations and invest in management teams and enable them to transform the scale of the work that they're doing. So I think it will work extremely well for scale and partnership with government systems, and we absolutely need to lean into that, including with multilateral development institutions and national development institutions. But it doesn't work for all parts of civil society and the work that we need to do.
Yep. Charles. And then we have one last question. So we're going to make the answers brief, guys.
Sorry.
No.
Thank you, Naina. Charles Keedon from Alliance Magazine. So just want to recall something Olivia Leland said near the start, which is that we should be funding at the scale of problems at the scale of the problems we're seeing. So I'd like to just ask the heads of the foundations here what that would or could mean in terms of the increases in your own spending in the coming years, if at all. Do you think you'll need to increase above 6%, 10%, and whatever percent it is that the OSF is funding at the moment? How much more do you think you need to increase your spending to meet the scale of the problems that we're seeing? Thank you.
So I think you've answered that question in the panel, but if you can just quickly.
Yeah, I mean, Charles, as I said, we have set a floor, not a ceiling. We are going to urge others to join us. I think the answer is in the aggregate, we need tens of billions of dollars more, right? At least out of U.S. philanthropies and others. I do think living donors are maybe able to do more because they've got more cash coming in than legacy foundations that have perpetuity in their charters and so forth. Mm-hmm. But I would go back to Kate's point about funding in the way that the problem requires. So at MacArthur, we start with, this is a problem in the world we want to solve, or an opportunity we want to seize. And then is it an impact bond? Is it cash as a grant? Is it using our endowment? I think the point is figure out what that is and then match it. So we're going to give out for the third time a $100 million award this year, right? That's because some of these problems require $100 million and our grants need to do that. Sometimes we're going to give out 25 fellowships at $800,000. So I think it is really what the problems are. And I think what we're all saying here is there's more to be done right now at this moment in our republic in the US or in global democracy.
No. Last question. The lady who's got her hand up with the glasses. Do you want to just stand up so they can give you a mic?
In these uncertain times, I'm asking for all of you, what are the best? I'm nervous. I don't know why.
You're good.
Don't be nervous.
Good.
Don't be nervous.
You sound great.
What are the best advice to bring for our impactful work to bring more attention for philanthropists?
Okay, how do you get the attention of philanthropists?
Yes.
What is your advice?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I thought I was in trouble. And I see you're wearing a dandelion badge, so you're obviously already a consummate networker, and I think the COP in Brazil is going to be a real opportunity to showcase your work, so do get in touch. I think to get the attention of philanthropists, I mean, it's really networking. I mean, we have the privilege of having overseas offices, which means we're potentially easier to contact for some, but we don't have offices everywhere, and so events like these are really, really, really crucial. I think having laser focus on what you think your added value is and what you think you can deliver is really, really important. That clarity is what I think really sells organizations. For me, if I have an organization, a conversation with a new organization, and their leadership absolutely knows what they can do, what they're good at, what they want to try, what their challenges are, and they're really crisp on their purpose, that for me is always hugely reassuring. And as the others have said, when you have that clarity of purpose and that alignment of purpose, you're willing to let people innovate and do things and try things and fail. But having that clarity of purpose is really, really important. And just on the funding thing, I would say All foundations have asset managers. SIF has just adopted a climate transition plan. We're leaning into the ESG movement no matter what happens in the US. And so our investment manager has to have conversations about climate performance with all of the companies that our endowment is invested in. So there's a lot, we've picked climate, but there's a lot more that others can do. And there is regulation in Europe, which means that investors should be asking these questions. Companies should be developing transition plans. And so being part of that movement as asset owners, I think is really, really crucial also for philanthropy.
Thank you for adding that little bit in, but okay. Don't think I didn't notice. No, thank you. You guys have been an amazing audience, and you know, first a big round of applause to yourselves, and to my amazing panelists. I think we can all agree that, you know, philanthropy can do a lot more. I mean, it does, but it doesn't as well. It's hard. There are so many doers in this room. I'm also one of them. It's really tough. We're always pitching. We're always talking. We're always, you know, we're doing good work, and we can't understand why it's not funded. I think we talked a lot about local context here and why it's important. I think it's really important. If you look at the global majority, as you mentioned, the countries in the global south or where the global majority live, they have always lived under strictures. They've always lived in shrinking civil societies. They've always lived in the reality that the United States finds itself right now. And yet philanthropy, civil society organizations, advocacy organizations have continued to flourish. So I think there is a lesson to be learned from there, that we don't give up. You just find a different way to do things, and you continue to do things. And it's not the time to be paralyzed and say, oh, I am now re-evaluating my strategy. Stop re-evaluating your strategy. As John, as Olivia, as Binaifer, as Kate have all said, just go out and do it. Don't think so much. You know, this is money to be given away, people. Let's give it away. Let's try and see what we can do. And let's do it in partnership and collaboration. Together, together, together. Together we are stronger. Together we are mightier. Together we are sharper. We bring in other people's contexts. We bring in other people's biases, and we're forced to listen. And I will end with, collaboration does not mean collaborating with me. It means coming together as a group and collaborating together. That is what each of my panelists here represent. And I think if we can get other funders to walk their talk, we will already do much more. So thank you again for being a fabulous audience. Thank you for joining us.